All right, everybody, welcome back to In Progress. This is our weekly roundtable discussion of the political stories and issues and ideas that are top of mind for progressive folks all across the Lone Star State this week. My name is Chris Mosier. I am the communications director here at Progress, Texas. Welcome if you're hearing us, especially on the radio in Houston, KPFT FM 90.1. Progress, Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions, and we operate a major digital network, including social media, podcasts, legacy media contributions, and tons more. We reach millions of people all across Texas every single week. This week, we're joined by Executive Director Kathleen Thompson, who's in New York, not New York City, but New York State. Hi, KT.
Hey, folks. Hello from beautiful 70-degree weather. I'm sorry because I've got reports from home about how miserable and swampy it is, even across Texas. Like everybody lives in Houston right now.
We are absolutely jelly for sure. Tatum Owens returns from her vacay. She is our advocacy and development coordinator. Hi, T.O.
That me. Good to be back. And it was swampy in Belize as well, but very much enjoyed. So glad to be back.
Very good. We want to hear all about it. And we're always glad when we get to bring in one of our, fellow folks out there in the world of independent media and someone that we've been a big fan of for a long time for her terrific work at the Houston Press. Journalist April Towery is with us. Hi, April. How are you?
Hi. Glad to be here.
So April's first time on the show. That means she gets to go first and tell us all about her and tell us all about her work at the Houston Press real quick before we get started.
All right. Well, I won't get into the deep background, but I was a journalism major at Texas A&M back when they had a robust journalism program. Wrote for the Battalion student newspaper and have written for newspapers in Texas. Kind of cut my teeth at the Bryan College Station Eagle, which I still think is one of the greater daily newspapers in Texas, and went on to work in Georgia and Florida, came back to Texas, and I've been at the Houston Press for about a year and a half.
We're so glad to have you. And one thing that caught our attention is a recent article that April put together about a story that we've been also covering, which is the turmoil and kind of turnover that's really just in the beginning stages. It hasn't actually happened yet, or part of it hasn't yet. The changeover that we're expecting at the Office of Secretary of State at the state level. Jane Nelson has occupied that office for a couple of years now, a little while now. And she has announced that she's quitting. Her last day on the job, I believe, is the 17th, if I'm remembering correctly, and April will remember that for sure. But there is some concern about who might be next in that post, and the person who has come into play is recently former state representative out of North Texas, Nate Schatzline, who has, to my knowledge, just about zero experience when it comes to administering elections at any level, much less across the state of multiple millions of people and millions of voters. April, we'll let you go first here too, because you wrote the article that has brought you into the fold here. Tell us about the situation with Nate Schatzline, kind of an overview, and how, in particular, your story for the Houston Press talks about how it affects or could affect Harris County.
Yeah, this happened right before the July 4th holiday, in what seems like the dark of night. You know, Abbott sends out these press releases saying, we've made some new appointments. And frankly, I don't always read through. I usually scan them to see if there are any names I recognize, and seeing that he's created a position of an advisory role on election integrity for Nate Schatzline, who does not have any experience, and is considered to be, by a Rice University poll, the sixth most conservative member of the Texas House, behind Mike Olcott, Briscoe Cain, Steve Toth, David Lowe, and Brian Harrison.
Wow, so, what a bunch that is.
What a bunch. So he is not even, as evidenced by, and I think we'll get to this later, but Jane Nelson saying, if he becomes Secretary of the State, I may not step down.
Right, right.
He's not even popular among Republicans. And Jane Nelson, of course, is a Republican. He's an election denier. He wants closed primaries, which is just a logistical nightmare. And there is a pretty valid concern that he will interfere with elections. The Rice University professor that I spoke to called him a pit bull. And we all don't want people telling us how to do our jobs, right? And so I think it's a valid concern for for people in the large counties who have maybe had some glitches in elections in the past to be worried that there's going to be not even just additional oversight. I mean, election integrity on its face is a good thing, but having people say, we need you to run these reports, we need to know what you're doing at every second of every day, you just busy work that takes them away from doing their job.
Certainly. And the threat posed by him being put forward as the front runner, and thank you, April, for naming a few of the other contenders, including Briscoe Cain, which would have been bad in a different way. In a different way. Also, Paul Betancourt was being considered at one point, but Schatzline being the front runner at this point is very concerning. Voting rights advocates have been mobilizing around this ever since Jane Nelson announced her departure, and it's interesting to know that many of us fall in the same lane of concern that Nelson does with his appointment, because, of course, we've followed his track record in the legislature with him putting forward election-denying claims, but also as a only two-term lawmaker, he's already staunchly advocated against election policies that would make voting accessible to every Texan. He was one of the only contenders that's also not around the Houston area. I think that that's significant. You can expect that he'll still certainly target Harris elections. He put forward a bill, SB 1933, which is like a conservator appointment, basically a way to take over Houston elections in his own form. So there's already a track record in place as a lawmaker for him. And so if he were to take over the Secretary of State, this would be extremely alarming. Where does that leave us? What is the real reality of him taking on the senior advisor role and moving into the Secretary of State role?
I mean, I think that's a question for Greg Abbott. Like, what's the plan here? And Abbott has historically been super critical of Harris County elections. And some people believe that's without merit. Our county clerk, Janisha Hudspeth, took over elections. There was a little bit of a takeover where they hired an elections administrator. The elections went back to the county clerk in 2024, and she has administered numerous elections since then. And by all accounts, I'll say all, most anyway, has done a great job. There are always a few little, a power outage at a polling place, those kinds of things that happen. But there have not been any significant challenges to the election process. And yet, Abbott came out, after Sylvester Turner died last year, and he had an opportunity to call an election, a special election, to fill that U.S. Congressional District 18 seat. He waited 8 months to do that.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
And we know his reasoning was because they didn't want another Democratic voice in the U.S. House of Representatives. But his reasoning in public was Harris County is terrible at elections.
Right.
They're the worst. And we want to give them some time to get their stuff together so they can do this properly.
Something that I'd like to add is that April is correct that he has no elections administration experience. He wasn't a former elections administrator in any county. He's from Tarrant County. He never worked at a elections administration office in Tarrant County or any other county, but also he's never served on an election-related legislative committee. He's never passed legislation related to elections. And one of the things at Progress Texas that we work so hard every day to do is to help Texans understand public policy. So therefore, if this man is not qualified for this job, there has to be a reason why he would be appointed to this position and why he's a likely contender to be the next Texas Secretary of State should Jane Nelson resign. And the answer to that is easy. It's loyalty. It's loyalty to President Donald Trump. It's loyalty to Ken Paxton. Nate Schatzline was one of the lawmakers who didn't go along with so many other Republicans who impeached Ken Paxton not so long ago. But at the same time, it feels like 100 years ago, right?
Right.
But it wasn't so long ago. So that loyalty remains. So if he's loyal to the president, if he's loyal to Ken Paxton, and therefore that's why he gets the job, it just makes sense. Jane Nelson is not disliked by most Republicans. She was approved by the Senate. It was bipartisan. But Jane Nelson broke with the Republican Party of Texas earlier this year. I mean, she rolled over when Trump said, "Give me the voter rolls." And secretaries of state across the country are saying, "Heck no." I know we're on the radio. Heck no. But she said, "Here you go," on a silver platter. But where she wouldn't go along was with the idea of the Republican Party of Texas and Nate Schatzline and Ken Paxton to say, let's close the primaries and to make Texas less little d Democratic. So we've got the loyalty back when with the impeachment. We've got the loyalty with President Trump saying falsely that the 2020 election was stolen. And now standing up against Jane Nelson and saying we must close our primary under the guise of, quote, air quotes, y'all, election integrity. So that has to be the why that Greg Abbott would appoint him to this position. Governor Greg Abbott does what President Trump wants. When he says, give me 5 more congressional seats, he says, yes, boss. So if this is a instruction from the White House, it just makes sense because he's loyal to Ken Paxton. Ken Paxton is at the top of the ticket. He won the Republican nomination. Therefore, it makes sense that Jane Nelson would be pushed out and encouraged to leave the role before the biggest election, in decades for Texas.
And of course, that's coming off of the March primaries, which already broke records. So this leaves a void that is incredibly unstable for someone who, like Kathleen pointed out, had a somewhat imperfect but still trusted record for countering election denialism, which has been a major, major concern, especially going back into 2024. We know that Schatzline will be someone that is a person who will slow walk or refuse to certify November results as the top election officer. Again, he's senior advisor now. This is if he gets put into Secretary of State. That is extremely detrimental to what we know will be a high turnout election.
Right. We all know, following statewide politics as closely as we do, and of course, as a primary watchdog on the right, we understand what Nate Schatzline is all about. Folks who aren't paying very close attention or who are not from North Texas may not understand. This man is a central character of the Christian nationalist movement that has really taken root, especially in North Texas. Speaking of loyalty, to me, that's where his real loyalty is to that cause. And of course, that cause is very much a part of the overall Trump/Abbott machine for sure. So that's worrisome. Absolutely. It's really, really interesting to me. Jane Nelson, different in really just kind of being pretty much a Republican workhorse, pretty much just, kind of a loyal soldier and just, not super radical or anything like that, but definitely kind of doing as she's expected to do for the most part. There's theorizing that started earlier this week about the possibility that she might, really, really do a 180, considering her own track record and refuse to leave the office, which in fact she can do. April, do you know the details, the parliamentary details, I guess you would call it, the technical details about why Governor Abbott would have a hard time getting rid of Jane Nelson should she decide not to step down next week?
Yeah, the Senate confirmed her a couple of years ago, and typically, under normal circumstances, the Senate would have to confirm Nate Schatzline if in fact he is put in that position. Insiders, watchdogs have told me that the Senate will not confirm him. So if Jane Nelson resigns, Abbott, the governor, can appoint someone temporarily, and that person will stay on through the November midterms and through the 2027 legislative session. Unless that person is confirmed by the Senate, we don't think that Schatzline, should he be given that appointment, will be confirmed by the Senate. Jane Nelson can shake all this up if she revokes her resignation, which reportedly she is considering, which sounds huge alarm bells because, typically when you announce that you're leaving a job, it's kind of like good riddance. And for her to say that she's that concerned about a fellow Republican becoming Secretary of State, I think is worth keeping an eye on.
I don't know that I've seen anywhere where she has actually said this out loud. It's been kind of a fair amount of hearsay that about this entire, hesitation for her to depart. I do think there is something to this hesitation for sure for Jane Nelson.
Abbott doesn't have the authority to fire her. Because of that Senate confirmation, he cannot dismiss her. He can't fire her because of that. And I was saying earlier, it was bipartisan support. I should have said it was unanimous.
Right. That's true. It was totally unanimous. I want to back up just a second and talk a bit more about Nate Schatzline's background and his, again, very much a figurehead of the Christian nationalist movement. We've been talking so much about this lately. We had Americans United on last week, and it's just been kind of a recurring theme from Dan Patrick's proclamations that the separation of church and state doesn't exist anymore or never did. There are so many indicators all across the political spectrum of the growing momentum and influence of Christian nationalism. And a guy like Nate Schatzline ending up in a primary role to where he could basically flood the zone at the very least. He could at least cause chaos, especially in the bigger cities, when it comes to this November's election is quite frightening. Kathleen, for folks who are not following that and who don't really quite understand how he fits into the picture, especially there in North Texas, maybe starting with Mercy Church. Kathleen is our Dallas representative in particular, so tell us about his role within that world up there.
The Northeast Tarrant Tea Party, which rebranded after being called a hate group by social media and being banned by Facebook, now that calls themselves True Texas Project. If you listened earlier this week, you heard Chris Mosier on the Daily Dispatch discussing Patriot Front, a Grapevine, Texas-based consortium of white nationalists, fascists, Christian nationalists, white supremacists.
Yeah, these are the guys that we saw in D.C. over July 4th with their khakis and their masks and all that stuff. That's those guys.
Right. And who couldn't figure out the subway. Haha. Bring public transportation to Texas. So these people are the same people who are responsible for electing the likes of Tony Tinderholt in Tarrant County, Nate Schatzline in Tarrant County, Jonathan Stickland in Tarrant County, good riddance. Salman Farjani holds that seat now for Northeast Tarrant County. So Nate Schatzline Church is an anti-intellectualist, white Christian nationalist, and I use the term church very loosely. It's not any kind of church that I grew up with. These are people who brag about their low vaccination rates. In addition to being election deniers, they're COVID deniers. And we're part of the reason that Tarrant County's COVID rates were through the roof, as opposed to some of the other counties. That's why the measles epidemic spread like wildfire across Texas, because people are proud that they're not taking care of their kids' health. They're proud that they ignore public health warnings as if any of them are infectious disease experts, just like Nate is not an election expert. To know the Mercy Culture Church is to know Nate Schatzline and Tony Tinderholt and the Jonathan Sticklands and the True Texas Project. They believe that they're in a spiritual warfare for the state of Texas and for our government. And it's very frightening that people know that this isn't the Republican Party that they grew up with or their parents' Republican Party. They are far-right extremists who do not agree with public health. They don't agree with public education. The once or twice I had a run-in with Don Huffines of the same ideology. They don't believe in public schools. They want kids being taught at home by their mothers who stay at home. I mean, just wanting to roll back the clock, 50 and 60 years. That's what's on tap should elections be won by white supremacist Christian nationalists in November, and having one of their own control elections in Texas is something that every Texan should be paying attention to.
It would be a coup for them, for sure.
Certainly. And just adding on to a little bit more about the Mercy Church, this is make no mistake, this is no regular church. They have their own political nonprofit. For Liberty and Justice is the name of it. I don't know about that. It also houses something called Campaign University, it outlines all the different policy points that Kathleen said for candidates, spirit-led candidates pushing that kind of doctrine agenda, that white Christian nationalist agenda. And so as that relates to our Texas elections this November, we know that the white Christian nationalist agenda, some of the things that fall in line within that include xenophobic legislation, policy points, racist voter suppression, two major concerns coming off of the racial redistricting scheme and the targeted attacks of ICE on our communities. What that looks like in terms of our elections, though, it would look a little different. It would hark back to, we've kind of left this in the past, it would hark back to the mass purge of voters using DHS and DOJ, citizenship data, which for Schatzline would be a high priority, mass election complaints, directing counties to require DPOC. If y'all remember the SAVE Act, the documentary proof of citizenship, that would come back. And so many concerns that come with the personality that he leads as a pastor of this church and as a political candidate leading that spiritual warfare.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, these are the Christian nationalists, and I've learned much about this through your reporting and the guests you've had on recently. But and I heard you all report that Schatzline has said the legislative body of the Texas legislature belongs to Jesus.
There was a prayer group, like a large group prayer that I want to say may have been at the beginning of the last legislative session, in which, that was his verbiage, that basically this place belongs to Jesus.
When I was growing up, there was a Christianizing movement among the State Board of Education at that time, with Don McElroy as the chair of that board, and the debate was over evolution and creation. But I don't know, like, this is new to me, this Christian nationalist movement, and these people who subscribe to that truly believe that it is their calling to bring Jesus into the government, into schools, into their homes, certainly in their businesses. And they will stop at nothing to do that because they feel like they've been sent by the Lord to do it. And we can make it sound a little, those of us, our Houston Press publication tends to be a little left-leaning or progressive, and that's what our readers want to read about. And we can make them sound crazy, in some of the things they say, like the legislative body belongs to Jesus, but they're saying these things, so that is open to the interpretation of whoever's listening or reading to that. So it's just an interesting time that we're in, where they are really from the bottom, from the Cy-Fair ISD school board, which you covered, from a local school board election all the way up to the governor of Texas. They're wanting to control. It's this really sort of Trumpy desire for control in all aspects of leadership and government, and it's disenfranchising voters and people who attend public schools, people who want to make their voices heard at a city council meeting. It's concerning, and it's not Christianity. It's not the same thing as
not.
Like Kathleen mentioned, the church that I was raised in. That's not what we're about.
Yeah, it's all about power. It's very much about control, like we've talked about. And as Kathleen said, and I hadn't really thought about this too much, but the conflation of loyalty and faith are kind of the same thing in this bunch as well. It makes me think of the private school voucher situation, where those private school vouchers, by and large, are going to parochial schools. That money is going from the public sector, from your neighborhood public school, to a school that's run by a church, and run by a church as they see fit, with every single right to discriminate against any kid who might want to attend that on their voucher or not. And so it's interesting, April's, writes for the Houston Press, and the entire, the broad scope of Christian nationalism is kind of new to her. And so it's kind of one of those things that one of the reasons that we, perhaps harp on this as much as we do is because so many people have not realized the degree that of our lives, of our public lives, that this phenomena has permeated at this point. Also makes me go back to Dallas Fort Worth. Makes me think of Taylor Rumette. Makes me think of Lee Wamsgans, who Kathleen Thompson has had personal run-ins with her, as well, as we've well documented. She is the Republican opponent for Taylor Rumette, who he beat in that special election to end up in the Texas Senate. She comes from an operation called Patriot Mobile, which is a telephone company in North Texas. that has to be connected some way or the other to mercy culture, or definitely as part of that same fabric for sure up there, especially in North Texas. And I don't mean to pick on North Texas necessarily, because this happens all across the state for sure. But generally, when you see pretty radical right-leaning politics, there is probably at least a degree of Christian nationalism that has been worked into that lawmaker or candidate's talking points. It's almost certainly there. It's really become part of their fabric.
The Patriot Mobile Group spent multi-millions to infiltrate school board takeovers across northeast Tarrant County and across Tarrant County. And I'm talking 11, different races that were flipped back finally last year. And then successes have been made this year to take back some of those seats for people who put public education first. But their priorities were book bans. Like my son's school lost their librarian. They got rid of the Scholastic Book Fair. My kids love the Scholastic Book Fair. You get a poster, you get books, you get erasers, but that's woke, according to them, to books. And the emphasis on making our public schools Sunday schools, it's all interwoven. And you said, Chris, you don't want to pick on Tarrant County, but I have to say that Democrats and progressives and Republicans let them take over their school boards by ignoring those races. I'm sure you've all seen the political cartoon that's a man walking a dinosaur, and the man says the Republican Party, and the dinosaur says Tea Party. And then in the next frame, the dinosaur has eaten the man. The Republicans let in these far-right extremists thinking we're going to tow them along, by the neck. And they're going to do what we want, and they're going to help us win elections. And then they took over the Republican Party, and I'm talking local level, state level, and federally what's happened with the Trump administration. So yes, it is happening across the state. But when people sleep on local elections and regional elections, because elections are so nationalized now, people are mad about President Obama, or they're mad about this governor that's not even in Texas. It's some other, blue state governor, but they can't tell you, who's on your school board, who's on your city council. Do you know who the judge of your county is? And it's not a judicial posting. It's the executive. I mean, just basic. So that's why we're here to talk about public policy every single day, and to get you listeners to talk to your friends and family about these races, because the quality public education that you had 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 10 years ago, it's not the same. And the school boards and the educators who love our kids and who love public education are fighting against people who want to turn public schools into their version of Christian Sunday schools, but it really isn't the Christianity that we all grew up with.
I will say one of the things that was a major recurring theme for us during our time in Corpus Christi at the Texas Democratic Convention was the efforts of progressive folks in Tarrant County and in North Texas to fight back against this. The success of Taylor Ramette can be seen as definitely a bit of a resurgence of folks that are beginning to pay attention, as Kathleen talked about, which is there's definitely good news lately happening in Tarrant County and all around North Texas. This has been a terrific discussion. Another recurring theme that we have around here that I want to recur upon here just real quick, since we have April Towery of the Houston Press with us, is the importance of independent media. Progress Texas is an independent media organization. KPFT Radio is an independent media organization. The Houston Press is an independent media organization. April, from your perspective, that everybody's heard our perspectives on this, tell us yours in terms of how important it is to support independent media, especially given what we see happening with CBS News and with ABC and with, on and on.
I hear all the time that you can't trust the media, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. I think that we're looking for truth telling, we're looking for storytelling, and with AI and with just lazy journalism, it's changed. And I think what we're able to do at the press is do things that are a little bit different. Gina Hinojosa was in town the other day to roll out her economic development policy, and I was able to get in a question about HISD and will she say again on record that she's going to fire the TEA commissioner? And we kind of took a different tack than some of the other media who were there covering it. We can do things differently. We can use curse words. We can
not on the radio.
We can, kind of present. It's not so much that there's a slant in the journalism. It's that there is. We are selective in the stories that we choose to cover. When we have written about Kim Paxton, for example, we've written about him aggressively going after a midwife in Waller who was helping people get reproductive health care. We're not so much covering his, every press release he sends out about whatever.
Are you guys covering the fact that he may have committed multiple voter felonies by?
I love that story.
We don't even have time for that.
I have not yet. We had a longtime Houston resident who was a Mexican immigrant who was shot in Houston by an ICE agent this week.
That's right. That's right.
That has changed the landscape a little bit. Everyone is talking about that and
for sure
calling for an independent investigation. This would be a great time for the Attorney General of Texas to step up. It would be a great time for the governor of Texas to say something. And yet the governor of Texas tweeted this morning that he has said goodbye to his irreplaceable first puppy named Pancake.
We feel bad for Pancake, but the optics couldn't be more clear on all of that. So April, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your great work at the Houston Press. We refer to you guys, all the time, actually pretty much daily. And so we really appreciate what you guys are doing. And thanks for helping us do the show today. We appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
And for Tatum Owens and Kathleen Thompson, I'm Chris Mosier. Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. Radio listeners, if you missed any of our show today, you're in luck because it will run again this weekend on KPFT Radio in Houston, 90.1 FM HD2 every Sunday morning at 11 a.m. More information on the radio station, grab that at kpft.org. April, what's the URL for the Houston Press real quick?
Just houstonpress.com.
Easy enough. And find out more about Progress Texas at progresstexas.org.